For this sew along, we'll be creating the Calli dress pattern, so grab your materials and let's get started. First, we're going to create the buttonholes for the drawstring ties using back casing piece number 10. You're going to take 1 by 1 strip of interfacing and apply it to the wrong side of the back casing over the buttonhole marking. Go ahead and give your interfacing a good press. Now we'll take your piece 10 to the machine and stitch the buttonholes on the front side of the back casing. Set your back casing aside and grab front and front side pieces 1 and 2, which I've already serged the raw edges of. We're going to place the right sides together, pin in front 1 and front sides number 2 together, matching the notches and dots. Now you can stitch the seam edges and go ahead and press the seams open using your iron. Now we're going to apply the pockets. Grab your pockets piece number 9 with raw edges already finished. We're going to put right sides together and place the pocket between the notches on the front side piece. You want to pin it and take it to the machine and stitch the pocket to the side of the garment using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Press your pocket away from the garment, pressing the seam against the pocket. Do this for both sides. Now take your garment to the machine. We're going to understitch the front pocket by stitching 1/4 of an inch away from the seam on the pocket on the front side. With the right sides up, we're going to create our pleat. Bring the 2 dots that you marked previously together and pin it. On your machine, you're going to stitch your pleat from the top of the raw edge of the pleat to the dot, which is about 1 inch down. Don't forget to back stitch at the dot. Now press your pleat flat using your iron. Now we're going to apply our gathering stitches to the top edges of the front using the dots that are marked. Using your longest stitch setting, create 1 set of gathering stitches between the dots at the peak and the first seam at the bust. Do this for both sides. You'll create a second set of gathering stitches between the dot at the bust front seam and the dot at the underarm seam. Do this for both sides. Now you want to make sure you can locate the ends of your gathering threads and start to give them a pull to create your gatherings. Gather each set individually, and we're going to grab our binding, which is piece number 5, and with the right sides together, we're going to match the center dot of the binding to the pleat dot and gather the top stitches so that the dots match to the front dots along the edge and seams. Pin your binding and do this for both sides. When you're finished applying the binding to the front of the garment, take it to the machine and we're going to stitch the binding to the garment using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. It's best to start sewing at the underarm dot and stitch till you reach the pleat dot. Make sure to back stitch at the pleat dot and do this for the other side also. Now you can go ahead and trim your seam allowance around the binding. Go ahead and press the seam in the binding up away from the garment. Now let's apply our upper back tie, piece number 6, to our binding. Take the ends of the binding and the ends of upper back tie and match the notches with right sides together. After machine stitching it, we're going to trim the seam allowance and press the seam open with our iron. On the wrong side, fold the binding over 1/2 inch and then again 1/2 inch, covering the seam and creating a binding over the seam. Pin the binding at the seam. Make sure to continue folding and pressing your binding 1 inch over on both sides through the peak of the pleats. Continue pinning your binding to your seam, and then we'll take it to the machine and give it a stitch. This is where you want to stitch in the ditch. On the front side, stitch in the seams, catching the folded edge on the wrong side. Start at the pleated dot and end at the underarm dot, removing the pins as you go. Now, with the right sides together, bring the long edges of the tie and binding together, close to the peak of the pleat and the base of the tie. leaving a small opening for turning ties. You want to pin the edges. Do this for both sides, pinning or clipping the upper ties from base to end. Now let's take our garment to the machine and we're going to stitch a 1/2 inch from the folded edge all the way to the end of the tie. Do this for both ties. Now you can go ahead and trim the seam allowance to your tie and binding. Starting at the base of the tie and the peak of the pleat, we're going to use our turning tool to pull the ties right side out, starting from the base of the binding. Do this for both sides and go ahead and adjust the seams of your opening, pressing them in and pinning the openings closed at the base of your tie. Press your ties and attach binding. You can even use a bit of stay stitch between your openings to keep the openings closed. To permanently secure the openings at the base of the ties, you have the option to slip stitch by hand or use your machine to edge stitch. I chose to edge stitch. Make sure you do this for both sides. Finally, at the base of the ties, you're going to crisscross one tie over the other and secure the ties together by edge stitching one to the other on both sides. This can also be done by hand stitching. Now we're going to assemble the back side of the garment. Don't forget to finish the side edges of back side 3 and back piece 4. With the right sides facing, matching notches and dots, pin the center back pieces 4 together down the middle seam and take it to the machine and give it a stitch. Give your back seam a press with the press and iron. With right sides facing, matching notches and dots, we're going to pin back side piece 3 to the center back piece 4. Attach both backside pieces, matching your notches and dots. Take it to the machine and stitch a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now let's apply our back pockets. With right side spacing, pin the pockets to the back sides between the notches. Take it to your machine and give it a stitch. Press your pockets open and away from the garment. Now let's apply our gathering stitches along the top of the back between the dots. One set of gathering stitches between the dot at the edge of the back side to the center back seam dot, and another set starting and stopping on the opposite side. Locate the ends of your gathering stitches and start to gather. Now grab the back casing, piece number 10. With the right sides together, match the center seam dot to the center of the back casing between the buttonholes. Gather the top stitches to fit the back casing and pin. Take it to the machine and give it a stitch. Now as your back casing is attached to your back, press the seam up and give it a trim. On the wrong side, we're going to fold the casing over a 1/2 inch and over again a 1/2 inch, covering the seam. Pin the casing in place and take it to the machine and stitch in the ditch. Once the casing is done, press it and set it aside. Now we're going to create our lower back ties and our tie loops. Grab the remaining pieces, back ties number 7 and loop pieces number 8. With right sides together, fold the ties over lengthwise. Do the same for your loops. Give them a press. Pin and stitch the remaining loops and ties using a straight stitch a 1/2 inch from the folded edges. Trim the seams and using your loop turner, turn the loops and the ties right side out. Press your loops and ties flat using your pressing iron. Set your loops aside and grab your 2 4-inch pieces of elastic. We're going to attach 1 4-inch elastic piece to each of the ties using a zigzag stitch. Go ahead and pin it in place, and then we'll take it to the machine. Using the zigzag stitch on your machine, secure the end of the tie to one end of the elastic. Repeat this for the other tie. Finish your loops by folding them in half, pinning them, and zigzag stitching the ends together. Using your turning tool or a safety pin, feed your lower back ties into the back casing with the elastic end, ending at the edge of the casing, and the tie edge pulled through the buttonhole. Pin or clip the elasting at the casing edge in place. Complete this on both sides, feeding the elastic edge through the buttonhole all the way through to the end of the casing. Once both ties are fully threaded and your ends are pinned, you can take it to the machine and stitch the end closed through casing and elastic to secure the edges. Now with the right sides together, pin the back side to the front side, matching your notches, pockets, and pocket seams. Make sure to pin both sides of the garment, and then we'll take it to the machine and give it a stitch. When sewing the front to back, make sure to open up the casing to sew the casing seams. You're going to stop 3/8 of an inch past the pocket seam, then lift the sewing foot and pivot. Continue to sew 3/8 of an inch around the pocket, and then pivot back to the side seams and finish your stitch within 5/8 of an inch seam. Do this for both sides of your garment. When you're done, press the seams open in the pockets to the front. Now we're going to finish the binding and casing by folding the binding over the back casing edge. Make sure to tuck in all the raw edges and seams. Then we'll take it to the machine and stitch it. To secure the binding in the casing, you have the option to top stitch or slip stitch by hand. I chose to top stitch. Grab your tie loops. With the loops to the wrong side of garment, pin and stitch the underarm seam where the front binding meets the back casing. Stitch the loops down close to the bottom raw edge and again where the folded edge of the binding meets the loop. Complete this for both sides. Now it's time to feed the upper back ties through the loops on both sides. You can use your loop turner or safety pin to assist if you can't feed them through easily. To finish your ties, knot the ends of the ties so that they do not pass through the casings or the loops easily. These straps are adjustable, so all that's left is to make your narrow hem or your fold over hem to the garment, and you're done. Wear, repeat, and style. Until next time, guys.